opportunity to be heard. I'm Warren Brewer, and beside me is Paul Pearce. I believe you might have met him a bit earlier in the day. We don't propose to go through our entire submission word for word, but just highlight a couple of the key issues as we see them. Firstly, we think that this consultation process fails within its own terms. We don't see it as being open, fair and inclusive. In fact, we've gone so far as to suggest that it's something of a sham. And we've got some incidents that we can table to support this contention. The process is neither unencumbered nor independent, is the guts of our submission. The covert, as we would see it, interference is from the government. We've cited the only piece of evidence we have is a letter from yourself, Madam Mayor, to Minister Adams regarding unilateral changes to the agreed statement of expectations being a concern to the council, as in fact it should be. So we think that the government is probably leaning on you to an extent that is beyond the scope of a fair and open process. We also regard some of the regulatory burdens as a problem. SERA and various other organisations that are not democratically accountable to anybody. We also think that some individuals involved in this hearing itself are not overly how do I say this politely, are not genuinely engaging in a open and fair process. I'll give you an example of that. In the long-term plan community pre-engagement, and I'll go a direct quote from that report, the issues around asset management and ownership elicited the strongest responses across all online, print and face-to-face comments. Many people were vehemently opposed to selling any assets and seeing it as short-sighted. That was done before your December meeting when you resolved that asset sales were probably the way to go. Excuse me. The second point of contention that we wish to raise is we don't see any of the propositions you are considering in the draft long-term plan as being anything other than ideological dogma. It's based on a highly contested report, the Cameron report, which we see as policy-based evidence-making as opposed to the opposite. It's objectivity tortured by dogma, in our view, and is supporting the failed policies of last century. We've gone through several governments during last century that sold assets in the interests of saving money, reducing taxes and various other things. $19 billion worth of our assets were sold and we still have a debt. That will be the same situation that we face here, in our view. That's essentially... No, there is in fact international evidence showing that privatised services do not deliver what is claimed of them. And a good example of the not sure where to go next, frankly. The issue behind the Cameron report and the embedding of that into this long-term plan is of great importance, and we believe that it's not being considered properly in this forum. As we've said, we regard that the information in that report to be insubstantial, not enough to base some of the decisions that we're faced with making in this city. It is dogma. They are proven to be the policies that have failed in the last century, and there is increasing body of literature suggesting that public ownership and democratic control of public utilities is the best way forward. Now, we went to some trouble to find that the public contention has been made by the press that some of the best financial brains in the country have poured over the council's finances. We wrote to the press to find out who these people were and what the conclusions were, and we've not had a reply. unfortunately. We also note that Deloitte's have given you some advice on the worth of council ownership, and we also note the comments of Orion Chairman and Craig Boyce, who noted that the retention of community assets, and particularly monopoly assets, should be vested in the community. And none other than Adam Smith would support that. Monopolies are often, more often than not, Smith contends, a conspiracy against the public. Paul, do you want to add anything?
Without being pejorative, and understanding that the council to some extent probably justifiably sees itself between a rock and a hard place. In other words, between the preferences which I think ought to be conceded of the public, that is, it's our property, it's essential property, we should keep on the one hand, and the pressure, sometimes ideological and sometimes practical, from the government on the other, which said government is ideologically driven itself. Now, we would ask that this council gird up its loins, so to speak, straighten its backbone and contest with the government. For example, I have heard it said that one of the arguments that the council is confronted with is we have this arrangement with the government which was signed by a previous council, but we are committed to it thereby. Well, I also understand that from yourself, Madam Mayor, you have written to the government saying, and I quote, "In this regard, the recent unilateral changes to the agreed statement of expectations are a cause of major concern to us." And so they damn well should be. My point is...
Not the only time I've written it either.
It's always dangerous to commit things to writing.
No, I deliberately put it to writing.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you did. The point being that any contractual arrangement between parties, if it is unilaterally reneged on by one party, that contractual arrangement is void. And therefore, you have the right, and I suggest the obligation, to say to the government, we need to reopen negotiations on all these matters, thank you very much, and see what the response is. I'm quite sure that if, as I say, you brace yourselves, you would get massive public support.
Can I ask a question?
We're running a little bit short of time. We were going to suggest to you that if there are no questions to take up the rest of our time, we would appreciate it if the balance of our time allocation could be assigned to the Keep Our Assets Coalition, which you're to hear from later.
No, I have a question. So,
yes.
say, I mean, look, of course we've written to the government and said
I'm sorry, can you speak up a little?
Of course we've written to the government
yes.
and said that we want to address a number of issues, not just the cost share, but actually a number of issues, that, like our land drainage recovery program, which we can't cost with any certainty over the 30-year horizon, which is our infrastructure strategy. So we've written to them about that, and there is a process going on where officials are talking, and we will be talking with the government eventually on these issues. But say everything was off the table. So say that we didn't have to proceed with our share of the anchor projects, the government took all theirs off the table. Say we got to a point where we couldn't fund the damage that was done to our land drainage recovery program. What do we do? How do we cope with that? Aren't we allowed to actually look at our asset base in order to release some capital to get our other assets, our underground assets and our roads? Well, we've had people from New Brighton telling us that their footpaths have been unable to be traversed for nearly 5 years. They can't even get out of their houses with pushing prams or on their motor scooters. So how do we deal with that?
Well, with any council, of course, it's always a matter of priorities as to where the do-re-mi gets spent. But as far as the assets are concerned, the way to realise their value is not by selling them off, but by using them as collateral to raise money.
That's right. And we've got the debt built into the whole structure because of how much money was put into Enable?
We actually tried that. We tried to put as much much debt as we could into the assets, but because there is an obligation of at least $350 million post-earthquake from the previous council to purchase or to actually make the enable networks, despite the fact that the government was going to do it anyway, it's not possible to put sufficient debt into the companies and not breach your debt ceiling. So we have looked at 7 different models for doing
Debt ceiling
is a problem. My understanding is that if you look at comparable councils, in terms of their population and their indebtedness, we're almost home clear compared to Dunedin and Wellington and other councils.
No, but we hit the debt ceiling, the LGFA limit in 2020.
That's an artificial construct. I mean, that's the problem with
No,
it.
it's a legal construct, and it is our relationship with the LGFA, which we've borrowed from. I mean, this is the debate that we're having, is what do we do when we get to the end of the line in terms of our capacity to borrow
we have to stop behaving as though we live in ordinary times. We live in exceptional times in this town.
I think we do know that. Tim?
Warren, I asked this question of Paul, and I apologise if you were here when I did. What is your thoughts with regards to, rather than selling down, as in leasing?
You're asking him now.
Yeah, no, I asked you before.
Asked me before. Yeah.
Sorry, so Warren, this is to you. So I'm apologising if he was here when I asked the question.
I mean, I'm not opposed to all asset sales, full stop. I'm not opposed to leasing, full stop. It's a matter of the issue that you're discussing. So I don't know what you want to lease, but by and large, leasing will not change your position from actually ownership of it and running a car park, for example. It's the issue of what that would advance for the council and the people of Christchurch, because the mayor is quite correct. It's pushing our bloody prams on the streets that matters, not covered stadiums and various other luxury things that people are just pissed with at the moment, frankly. Yeah. You know, we've got to put people at the centre of this rebuild. And ordinary punters are saying, we don't feel like that's happening. We feel like somebody else is interfering in this pot, and that the issues that are beyond the life of ordinary working people are what has the interest of the government and council. Appreciate that you're stuck with some of the stuff because of agreements and the like. Put people at the centre of the rebuild. That's our message.
Thank you.
Good. And that's an extremely positive note to end on. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Now, the Cranmer Bridge Club.